brands, footprints, installation, settings, dot sizes, and more. Consider this your general orientation to pistol-mounted optics. First, I want to talk about mounting footprints. If you're brand new to optics, you may not have known that there are different mounting footprints amongst optics and pistols. For me, I'm mainly concerned with slimline guns, which really only leaves me with 2 mounting footprints to choose from: the Shield RMS-C or the Trijicon RMR-CC. Since the RMR-CC is really pricey and kind of came to the market late, and very few guns actually use that footprint, I've chosen to avoid it altogether. The RMS-C footprint, however, comes on slimline Glocks and SIG P365s from the factory, so that's a no-brainer. This mounting footprint is also just kind of more common in general. Reticles / dot sizes and MOA. There's a huge range of options in this category, which can get really overwhelming when you're first starting out. Which one is best? Why this over that? Etc. Usually the reticle or dot size is measured in MOAs, or minute of angle. Imagine an MOA as being roughly 1 inch at 100 yards. So a 2 MOA dot covers 2 inches at 100 yards, and a 6 MOA dot covers 6 inches at 100 yards. I hope that makes sense. There are also options like the Holosun circle dot, which is actually a 32 MOA open circle with a 2 MOA dot in the center. Personally, I find that this kind of style of reticle is really busy and they kind of distract me from looking through the window at the target. My preference, and the preference of a lot of really good shooters I know, both competitive and defensive, is for the 6 MOA dot. And that's just because it's big enough that you can kind of tune the brightness settings without having to overcharge the dot to the point that it kind of blooms. Blooming just meaning that it essentially just goes from looking like a dot to looking like a starburst. Installation. For installation, there are 4 really important things to think about: plates, screws, thread locker, and torque. So some guns like the Glock full-size MOS line need plates to mount optics onto the slide itself. And unfortunately, the plates that come with those MOS line Glocks aren't very good and have kind of a reputation of failing. So considering the use of an aftermarket plate is probably a good idea in that circumstance. Although on other guns like the PDP, generally the factory plates are a better option. So this is just something that you're going to want to do your own research on, just kind of depending on which optic you go with and which gun you're mounting it onto. On slimline guns, the most common reason you would need a plate is to mount a Holosun onto a Glock 48 or a Glock 43X, because the Holosun isn't exactly the same as the RMS-C footprint, and the plate just makes it match. I used a C&H plate on my Glock 48, but I bought my C&H plate a little over 2 years ago, and I have heard that they've had quite a few QC issues over the last couple of years, so I'm not totally certain that I would feel super confident recommending them anymore. So again, that's just something that you're probably gonna wanna do your own research on. Thread locker is a key component here because screws back out. Screws back out, whether it's on an optic or on a holster. With movement and wear, they'll eventually start to back out. This is why it's important to use not only a thread locker, but also to witness mark those screws so that you know when they back out and how much. I have an entire video on witness marking, so if you don't know what that is, I'll link it here or down below or wherever. Typically, your optic will come with a manual that will tell you what the torque spec is for your screws. Simply follow those torque specs and use a torque screw to seat your screws appropriately. Zeroing. I know, especially as a beginner, this is probably the most intimidating part. Rest assured though, if you watch a good zeroing video, you should be able to get it done just fine. My advice is to be patient. Bring plenty of ammo. If you need to brace on something, that's fine. And if you intend on using it on your carry gun, make sure you test your zero with your carry ammunition. I realize that it's expensive, but it's a worthwhile investment to make sure the ammo you're carrying is going where you're aiming. A quick tip on that. So I cycle my carry ammunition every 6 months or so, and I change out my chambered round after it's been chambered a few times. And eventually I'll make a whole separate video about that and why I do it. But my tip for you is to save that cycled out carry ammunition for zeroing purposes and for checking reliability in future carry guns. Maintenance. A lot of people overstate the maintenance side of dots, in my opinion. Is it important? Absolutely. It's super important. Is it simple? Yes, it's pretty simple. However, some dots can make general maintenance easier. So we have open emitter dots versus closed emitter. This just means that the LED that projects onto the glass is either enclosed or open to the elements. So a closed emitter is generally less maintenance because it doesn't have this little divot to collect dust and debris. Other dot maintenance just includes cleaning the glass, switching out the battery, and checking the screws. That all seems pretty low maintenance, and it is, but keep in mind that some dots have their battery housing underneath, which requires you to take the entire thing off and reconfirm your zero at the range, while others are easily accessible with the dot mounted. Those are just some simple features that are at least worth considering in order to keep your maintenance lower. How to use. So I'm not going to get into the details of how to use a dot. I get by pretty well using mine and have about 10,000 rounds through various dots, but I'm certainly no expert here. I just want to run through some of the basics. So first, using a dot is not like using iron sights, at least not the way that most of us have been taught to use iron sights. Most of us are taught to maintain a hard front sight focus, so when you look at your iron sighting system, your rear sights are blurry, your target is blurry, and your front sight is your main focus, with the general goal of achieving equal height and equal light as you align with the rear sight. That's not the case with optics. When using a dot, you want to maintain a target focus. So your target is in focus while your dot and the housing in general is blurry. So this is actually one of the major benefits of using a dot. You actually get to focus on the thing that you're shooting at. I also find that it's easier to visually understand your margin for error with an optic than it is with irons. And that might not be the case for you. It's the case for me. Hold on, let me get something really quick. Okay, I have this little tool here. So for example, when I go to engage a target and I want to do it really fast, this is an acceptable sight picture, and this, and this, and this, and this. These are all acceptable sight pictures so long as they're aligning with the right portion of the target. So like if my dot's way up here and it's off the target, obviously that's not an acceptable sight picture. But if my dot is all the way up in the corner here, but it's aligned to the right portion of the target, that's an acceptable sight picture. For irons, these are also all acceptable sight pictures. However, I find that there is a lot more to process there that ultimately winds up slowing me down. The last thing I'll mention about general dot use is that if you don't have a good presentation from the holster or a ready position that allows your sights to come into alignment, that transition to a dot from irons may feel a little bit more challenging. So if you're already presenting your sights to alignment without one of these numbers upon presentation, then I'd say that your transition will be less of a challenge. Brands. Within the RMSC footprint, your main choices are Shield, SIG, and Holosun. I used a SIG Romeo Zero and did not like it. It's just cheaply made, yet somehow not less expensive than its competition. Shield just doesn't necessarily have the best reputation, so I felt like Holosun was my best bet. However, if you're not looking at slimline guns, you have a lot more options to choose from. And that's your general overview of pistol-mounted optics. I realized we focused mainly on slimline platforms, and that's simply because that's what I'm familiar with. Trust me, you do not want to listen to me go on about full-size dot options because I know virtually nothing about them. So thanks for watching this week's video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.